Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to the Inside Renovation Podcast. My name's Cody, as you know, and I'm so honored that you would spend your time with us today watching or listening to this wherever you stream platforms from. Today, my friend Brooke is not going to be here with us, but I have a very special family member to this house that I want to get you to know as we give you a Beyond Initiative update. Today is going to be our last podcast episode before we take a break for the summer. So the summer, we got some other content we're going to be working on, but we are going to give a monthly update. So there will be a monthly update in June and in July on some things that we're going to talk about today, which is our Beyond Initiative. And I'm fired up about that because it's been a little bit since we've had a conversation around
Beyond. If someone's new, like maybe they showed up at Easter.
Yeah.
Talk about Beyond. What does that mean?
Yeah. So the Beyond Initiative, really what we did is about, I guess it was 2022. We saw the need for us to get a new space, right? We were in the building we're in now, which is our headquarters right here on Maple, and we were having 4 services, getting ready to add a 5th in that August, and so we just began searching, knowing that like we weren't going to allow the size of our building to be a cap on what God wanted to do in and through this church, right? And so we're like, hey, our goal is not to fill more seats, but it is to fill heaven, and you got to have people in the building in order to launch them out to do those things, and we just started running out of space. So we began to dream, and that's where really I brought you in to help me kind of think through that and what that looks like.
Talk about good problems, you know.
Yeah.
Running out of space is a great problem.
That's right. And so we began to take a look at that and just kind of dream to go, okay, God, what do you have next? You know, is it another building we're going to need to renovate? If it is, you're going to have to give me a little extra grace for that, to do that again. Is it a rental? Is it a piece of land? Is it a school? Like what is next? And so we just began dreaming through that and trying to figure out what it looked like. And really some time had gone by, and we had kind of exhausted every option we really knew. And we tried to get into school, and at the time they weren't allowing us to do that. And so we just were like, okay, I guess we're going to add a 5th service coming on that 2024 year, really, this year. And at the beginning of January, I went to a buddy of mine's church, and it was just crazy. This girl kind of prophesied over me. She's like, when we were praying, God gave me this vision of a hill, 10 acres, overlooking a major highway. Do you know any? I'm like, no. Well, right before I went there, we had a kind of an update meeting in December. And there was a guy in the church that was like, hey, I got this piece of property I want to show you when you get time, da-da-da-da. And I was like, okay, cool, whatever. We had never really saw it yet.
Right.
And right after that, I was like, hey, you said you had a piece of property. Tell me about this. He's like, why don't I just take you there? I was like, all right, cool. It's cool. Where does he take me? Drives me up on top of a hill overlooking Highway 109, entering into Gallatin, and it's 10 acres. And it was just like, oh, my Lord.
That's insane.
This is it. And so, but even then, like, we wanted to make sure that it was right. You know, it's like I'm more of a skeptic naturally, so I'm like, this is crazy. When I thought, I'm like, this is so wild. If this happens, it can only be God. You know what I'm saying? I'm like, this is insane. And so, we began to do our diligence on that, which is when you got involved in helping us make that happen. And then alongside that, the county had their shift in their school board and all of that, and kind of revisited some of the policies they shut down back during COVID. And one of them was allowing churches to meet in schools. And so got to meet with Dr. Langford, and he was like, yeah, we're gonna allow you to do that. So then we were able to kind of get both. Like, right, we were like able to go, okay, we need a space between now and building something, if that's the route we're going. So then Gallatin High School happened, and that's where we've been since January. So the Beyond Initiative is really the opportunity to invite people in to not just building a building, because we are getting ready, as we'll talk today, to close on that property. It's really inviting people in to make a difference for generations to come.
That's right.
And we're not in the business of building buildings. We're in the business of building the kingdom. And so for us, we see this as an opportunity really to reach more people. And I think it's such a cool picture when you take a look at this property specifically, is that as you enter into the city, as Jesus paints in the Sermon on the Mount, like a city on a hill that cannot be hidden.
Yeah.
And we have an opportunity to be one of the first things you see as you enter into our city, and just hope that, and we can give people a new perspective, a new opportunity, a new beginning, and really a relationship with Jesus. And so to be the hope of the world and the light of the world. And so I'm pumped about that.
You're just a little excited for this.
Just a little bit, man.
Dude, that's incredible.
Yeah.
You know, when it comes to expansion, like church growth,
it's
one of those things where there are moments where everything feels fast and sudden to get going.
Yeah.
And there's parts of the process that are just like, man, this is so slow. Why is this taking so long?
Right.
And so there's just, when it comes to building buildings for churches, it's just a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
But when it comes to casting vision and letting people in on the process, we've got to have these moments where it's like, hey, just remind everybody, this is what we're doing. This is what it's about.
That's right.
This is what it's for. And so this conversation's really one of those reminder conversations.
Yeah. So why don't, again, executive pastor, Matt's one of the smartest, wisest leaders I know. I had the opportunity to walk.
Don't say that.
I had the opportunity to walk with him and work alongside him for a season at our previous church, and just grateful that you would care enough about the kingdom and believe enough about our vision to be a part of our team. And so why don't you kind of explain to them maybe what your role is, what you've been helping with, what you're kind of doing behind the scenes as someone who's not on the platform every single week. Why don't you give them kind of a snapshot of who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, the Bible talks a lot about just the different gifts the Holy Spirit gives, And I think there's some really great lessons in the New Testament when it comes to developing the new church that, Jesus had started. That's like, not everybody needs to work on the same things.
Yeah.
Like everybody can't preach.
Right.
Everybody can't do worship music. Everybody can't do kids ministry.
Yeah.
So as you bring people onto the team, I just like to help people specialize. So it's like, Cody, you've been given a significant gift. You're a fantastic communicator. You've got to carry vision for the church. And if you had to build a building on top of that, manage a staff, manage finances, you'd blow up.
Yeah.
And so there's actually a statistic. This is crazy. I think it's almost 65%. It might be 63. So we'll say 65 because it sounds better. 65% of pastors quit or are fired within 2 years of a building project.
Wow.
That's awful.
Yeah.
And it's insane.
Right.
But it's because pastors who are good leaders, they're good preachers, they think, well, let me take this on too.
Yeah.
There's no one else on my team that can really navigate this and manage a budget and manage a schedule.
And I felt all those things.
And so it's like, well, we don't need another pastor resigning from ministry
right.
or messing the process up. So let's specialize. Let's get you in a lane that helps you do the things that you're really good at. I've built a lot of church buildings in my career, and so let me help do that.
Yeah.
And so really we're just going to specialize in the things that God's given us to specialize in.
Right. Yeah, it's great. Yeah. I mean, because I remember this whole process was so overwhelming.
Oh,
I remember the first time we sat down, and I'm the one that everyone comes to, right? That they expect me to know the answer or to have the answer. And I have a responsibility to be able to communicate what's going on in transparency and all that stuff. But as far as like, so tell me exactly what we're doing here and the details for that. I'm like, there's no way I could manage that at all. And so really today, I just wanted to let some of you in who are a part of this process and with our Beyond initiative into when you have questions or you have ideas or whatever it may be, and you go, man, what's happening here? What's the plan with this? Who are you using for that? Like that kind of thing. I wanted to put in front of you the person who's really kind of been and will be handling anything Beyond related as we move forward in building into this first phase of our building.
So there's just something I'm super passionate about, and it may be like an old-fashioned word,
sure,
but it's called stewardship.
Yeah.
And for me, that's just like, if the church has been given resources, tithes and offerings from the church, it is leadership's jobs to do the most ministry possible with the fewest resources possible.
Yeah.
You've got to be wise, you know? And so for me, a stewardship process is like, well, we're not going to get into any contracts on this land that's going to put us at jeopardy. We're not going to waste money on processes. We're not going to, we're not going to just throw money around and if you don't have it to do that, right?
That's right. Yeah.
So one of the reasons it's taken, a little while to get this process started is because we're trying to be as wise and as cautious, as diligent as possible. And so, I mean, if you've never like built a home or been involved in building a building, there's 1,000 steps and you can make an incorrect step at every single one of those steps, So it takes a lot of strategy and a lot of planning and really great execution. But for the most part, it just means that we're going to manage God's resources really well in this process. And so if it takes us just a little bit longer to make sure the land will work for us, we're going to put the elbow grease in to make sure this land is really going to get approved for our purposes. So I don't want to get into a lot of the real technical details, but land has a use when it comes to the government's view of it. So it's going to be used for residential, commercial, agricultural. And so we've got to get the use right. And then there's all these different departments, from water resources that they want to make sure that, the stormwater system that we put there, from the gutters to the parking lot, that all has to get right. So we have to pre-design before we buy this land. Will this work for what the city's going to require? So we've been really behind the scenes working really hard for about a year on this specific piece of property to make sure it works for our purposes. And honestly, it's incredible because you wouldn't look at this piece of land and be like, oh, a church should go there. But once you start to move some of the dirt around and kind of like move the trees rings, oh, that's where it goes. It goes right there. And it's really exciting to see it all come together.
Yeah. from a spiritual component too, like I think you can go back and see that land has always mattered to God, right? And like when you would see him make promises to the Israelites, right? He would, hey, go to the land that I'm going to show you. And he would promise them a land, right? A promised land. And obviously we're not, in the Old Testament and we're not Israelites, but we are God's people. And I think that what's crazy to me to wrap my brain around is that there has never been another church or business on this property. Yeah. So if you believe that God created the world, which I do, God knew that a time would come where there was going to be, hey, I'm going to place a church to be representative of me on that piece of property. And you could even go as far as going, and ain't nothing else going to go there. Yeah. Because there's been other projects
that tried to put
things there that the city's going, that's not the right fit. It's not the right fit. That's not the right fit. And I think it's cool. Like, it's not accidental that God's going, nope, nothing else is going there. But there is going to be a church that's going to be one of the first things people see as they come into that city, to know that God loves Gallatin. And God loves the world, but he also loves Gallatin. And he's here, and there's a place for people to find hope and healing in Christ. And so that really excites me. And I would just encourage people, as I think through just the vision. Well, real quick, tell us maybe a quick update for maybe what we hope to see happen timeline-wise, just to kind of give people that, for those who are giving generously, have given generously, or maybe you're new to our church, or you're watching or listening to this and you don't even attend, but you've been given the gift of generosity, and God's blessed you with resources, and you're going, man, I want to know a little bit about the timeline of things, but I want to know this is good soil. So maybe give a little bit of that timeline of what we're hoping to see happen here in the next couple months, and as far as we can predict out, and really kind of giving you a way to maybe pray for, of how you could be a part. And maybe it is just prayer, but maybe it is an investment. So maybe you speak to that.
That was perfect. Well said. Yeah, I think one of the most frustrating parts about this is how many things are outside your control. Yeah. There's a process that you run that you're supposed to do all the steps that are on there, but sometimes you're leaving it up to engineers or to city planners to make sure that it gets all the right, approvals. And we call them entitlements in land development, but it's got to have the right entitlements to become what we want it to be. So again, we've been spending this last year getting all those processes done. And so really we're at kind of the final stage. One thing that took forever is there's some power lines that go through the property, and TVA owns an easement, in perpetuity. It just means, hey, we have the right to have our power lines on this property. I'm like, great, keep them there. Can we build a parking lot underneath it? So there was a process going back and forth with TVA of what can the parking lot look like under there? Well, that should have taken 45 days and took more 90 days. So, when you're running a year calendar, all of a sudden there goes 3 months just on one approval. On the that's not even where the building's going to go. So all these little nerdy things.
Wall. Retaining wall can't be there.
That's right. So we've crossed so many hurdles, and we've got a great team helping get all these things done. We've got a great civil engineer and a great developer who's helping us, and just so thrilled with the team that's around renovation doing this. Really, at this point, we're kind of looking at those final approvals from the city for the land use and for this building potential permit was going to go in place. And so we've actually submitted what we think of phase 1 and phase 2 with even what the exterior might look like, which could change in the future, just to start to get those final approvals for closing. And once we say, yes, this can be a church, it can look like this, there can be these many parking spaces and this many seats in the auditorium, then we'll go to close. The last thing I wanted to do was go buy the land and hope the entitlements worked out. No. Because the church is not in the business of owning land to resell it. It's that's not what we're doing. We're trying to put a church here. And if we can build the church that we think God's called to put on our hearts to build here, it's not the piece of land. But so far, we've checked all the boxes. It's just taken a little bit longer. So there's a good chance that we'll close on this piece of property this summer. And what we're doing with the cash that people have donated so far, we're going to leverage a little bit of debt in this process as well as we close the land, is we'd like to get some of the site work done as well. And what that means is we're going to start to dig out where the church foundation might go, start to build some of those retaining walls. But because it is on a hill, those things are a little more complicated, more expensive than normal. But it's also the reason we got this land so incredibly cheap. You go try to buy, 12 acres flat somewhere in Gallatin, it's going to be millions and millions. We looked at it. It's going to be millions and millions of dollars. So the fact that we got this for the price that we got it for, it just meant we got to get real creative. We got to be really determined to get this done. We got to have the grit to get through all the hurdles this piece of land poses. But if you can do that, you're going to get a great piece of land for a fraction of what it costs everywhere else in the city to build.
It's great. Thanks for that, man. It is. It's exciting.
I'm going to ask you a question. So when you think about the people who've been faithful, from the first moment you said, we got to go somewhere besides 325 Maple Street, will you be willing to donate to something that's just a hope and a dream? It's nothing. and people were like, yes, I'm in.
Yeah.
So maybe talk to those people who've been faithful since the beginning.
Mm.
And then the follow-up would be like, man, if people are just hearing about Beyond for the first time, like, what's the way they could get involved?
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to understand that one, money is not evil.
Yeah.
Right. And the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. I say that because a lot of times we don't want to have conversations around money when it comes to church. A lot of
it gets uncomfortable.
It's because that's the thing. A lot of times it has our heart, right? Yeah. This is why Jesus talked about it more than literally almost anything else he talks about. But to those who said, man, I'm not going to allow money to be my master, but rather I think they saw a vision and a mission greater than themselves, and they see money as a resource to fund the kingdom.
Yeah.
You get an EROI, right? It's an eternal return on investment.
That's great.
You may not get money back in your bank account, but you are getting people into heaven. You are seeing families get changed.
Yeah.
I mean, I think to people who've given, I'm so grateful because it's more than just going to this building initially or into a vision for a future building later, but you're really giving your money a mission, right? When you do that, because even in our church, as we've been doing this initiative, we haven't stopped doing ministry, right? So you're giving to an initiative for ministry to continue at a greater rate to reach more people. So you may not go to Puerto Rico, you may not go to the Netherlands, you may not go to one of these random Fiji, these countries that we have people that watch online every week, but your money is, your resources is, your heart is, the gospel is because of people's generosity. And so I think it's biblical because when you look at God's perspective when it comes to the way God thinks, God thinks in threes.
Okay.
And so he's the God of Abraham, he's the God of Isaac, and he's the God of Jacob. So I have to figure out in this season, which I'm in, right? I mean, you could say I'm in an Abraham, I'm not, I'm in probably the Isaac generation. You might be in the Abraham one, no. But just figuring out what's the role that I can play. Yeah. And I think so many people have taken on that mindset, and I think God's blessed it.
Okay.
Not just with providing this land. Like I do think that when you see the promises of God, they're also often connected to if you do this, if I'll do this, if you do this. Yeah. And so as people generously obey, you go study when Paul was taking up a collection, an offering for the kingdom to build more churches from Corinth. What you see them do is he starts going hey, they couldn't give, but they gave out of their poverty and God blessed it abundantly. Yeah. And that's God math. That's something like getting a piece of land for $1 million in Gallatin right outside of Nashville for 12 acres. It's that's not accidental. Do you know what I'm saying? God has to orchestrate those things. And oftentimes you see him do that as people go, you know what? I'm not going to allow what I see to determine how I live. I'm going to allow what God sees to determine how I live. It's going to be faithful, And so I think as people have been faithful, one, I just want to say thank you, because again, you've allowed us to continue to do ministry in a season. You made it possible for us to get into Gallatin High School, where we've seen our church almost double in size. We've had people come to faith literally every single week.
Right.
And so not just praying for a revival, we're living in the middle of one, and it's not just you're given to fill heaven one day, you're filling heaven now. And so what I would just say is, and thank you to those who give faithfully every single week, whether that be to the general giving or to this specific initiative. But then there's just been people who've come alongside us, and it doesn't even make sense on why they would give other than God's going, hey, I'm prompting you to be faithful. And that's what I'd ask. You continue to be faithful, right? And whatever God's putting on your heart to give cheerfully. Do it with that. So we never want to pressure people for anything like that. But, I do remember, I go back to where we hired John Maxwell's company that he started in Joy. And they gave us a scope of here's how many people you have coming to your church. And then here's the age and here's the average giving rate that people give. And all of that stuff they're I don't even know anything about.
Right.
And he's and here's what we predict and what we've seen happen. Here's the range of you're going to people are going to give this much at max, this much at minimum, right?
Yeah. And
it fell between a $250,000 and $450,000 range to give to this initiative. Yeah.
$400,000.
Right. And it's hard to, it's what am I going to build with that? You know what I mean? What am I going to buy with that? What, half an acre? You know what I mean? Of commercial property, 1 acre of residential, you're not going to get that anywhere in a prime location that people would come to church to.
Right.
With exposure to traffic or anything else, you're not going to get it for that.
That's right.
And so I was just, again, our theme was beyond, which came from Ephesians 3, where he says God is able to do immeasurably more above and beyond all that you ask, think, or imagine. So it's okay, well, even the initiative name became more but do you believe that?
Yeah.
Because the professionals are telling you this is what it's going to be. Or are you going to believe me for more? If you need more, then believe me for more. And so it's like, oh, okay. And so in that, it was just like, I remember sitting down and I was wrestling with this, because you want to put an idea of a number to the best of your knowledge of what we think it'll take to get to that next phase. And at the time, it's like, well, it could be a building, it could be land, it could be just like to say it's going to cost exactly this amount.
Yeah, we don't know. No clue.
So I'm like, okay, $1 million. And it sounds like, oh, $1 million, like Dr. Evil. It's like $1 million would get us the opportunity, knowing that for a loan, you got to have 20% down. So we're looking at like, okay, 4 million, 5 million. Like we could get something for the next season for that amount, right? And so I remember wrestling and talking to Jess, and I was like, I think we're supposed to just like put $1 million out there. And she's like, okay, that's crazy, because it's like, that's over double what they said was even possible. Mm-hmm. And I was like, we're just going to believe God for it. And I remember going through that season, inviting people to be a part of this process and just going like, hey, I'm not going to pressure you. That's not my style.
Right.
But like, hey, would you just pray? And so I remember going through this like spiritual journey with everyone for 21 days. We just studied the Bible and what God says about generosity and sacrifice and faith. Because you can give, not have faith, and it's dead, right? And so it's like, hey, first let's talk about the faith to do this and the heart to do it. Let's get it right. And so then I remember that commitment Sunday back in 2022. When we saw what was committed to give over a 2-year period, it was like $1,065,000, which was just wild. It was something like right at that amount.
That's crazy.
Which then is wild because our land that we found a year and a half later cost $1,065,000, which is just you can't tell me it's not a God thing. So I think part of the encouragement that the way I feel, because I personally give to this as well, is that like, you can't tell me that's not God. So for me, I go, God, when I trust you, I get to be a part of what you're doing around the earth.
Yeah.
That you would care so much about a detail to go like, okay, that's what was committed to give. Great. I'm going to give you a piece of property that costs way more than that for that same price.
Yeah.
It's like, man. And then you go, okay, what else do I need to trust him with?
Yeah.
So it builds my faith. And I'd say, I think anybody that has given, I think you've probably seen your faith be grown in the process, which would be what I would tell anyone who's new to this, to go, hey, this is not about money as much as it is about your faith and your trust and what really has your heart. And you never really understand the words of Jesus when he says it's better to give than it is to receive. So when you give, you don't do it to get a blessing, but then you realize by being a blessing to somebody else, you're actually the one that gets blessed. You know what I mean? Like, you're the one that gets to experience, like, man, I gave in faith and God provided and showed up, and I didn't miss it, and I got to see what God did with it, right? And so it's that concept: whoever sows sparingly will reap sparingly. Whoever sows generously will reap generously. So in the very beginning, we've just invited people to go, hey, listen, I'm not going to tell you what it is for you, because I don't know what generosity looks like for you. But like, we see generosity as a privilege, because then we get to see what God does with it, and we get to be a part of it, So I think if you're considering that, I would first just say, man, just pray. Like, of course, like this, if people are like, well, when is this building going to get built? Well, the building costs money. You know what I mean? It's like, that's the ugly truth about it. This is not free. Right now, some angel investor could be like, here, I got you, bro.
That's right.
You know what I mean? But it's like, it's probably going to take not the sacrifice of a few, but of many.
That's right.
And that's what's been the truth about our church all the time. It's like, it's not just the generosity of a couple people who can bankroll the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
No, it's the sacrifice of a lot that go, hey, I'll give what I can. And when people did that in the Bible, God showed up and provided abundantly. So that's what we're believing in for. And so I would just say, man, first thing you do is just pray. Like,
it's great.
Man, spend time with the Lord. Like, spend time and go, God, am I supposed to give to this above and beyond what I already give to the church?
Yeah.
And God may go, no, not right now. And if that's what God tells you, great. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Or he goes, no, I want you to give this. I think it'll always stretch you. I know it stretched me. I'm about wanting to puke. You know what I mean? So it's like, but it's like, it should stretch you, because it's supposed to build your faith, and God's after your heart. But I think, and I would just say, like, man, pray through that. And if you'd like to actually give to it, practically, you can go on our website, renovation.church/beyond, which is where we'll give these updates. That's the updates I referenced. And so we're going to give another Beyond update sometime in June, and then another one sometime in July. And then they'll probably become a little bit more frequent as we move along further in the process, and things get maybe a little bit more clear of what the next step consists of and the cost that comes with. Because that's another question I get. I'm sure you'll get now that people know, hey, this is who I would actually talk to, is like, what's this going to cost? It's like, well, we're trying to figure that out. Our best estimate, we have an idea, But we also want to be careful just because, we want to make sure that we're, again, being good stewards of what God's given.
All these details, it's just a hold loosely kind of moment.
That's right.
It's like, man, this is our best with the information we have right now. This is the next best step we have.
That's right.
Maybe, and we wanted to keep this conversation a little short today.
Yeah.
But I'm just got this like word in the back of my head I want you to talk about for a second. And so when you talk about giving campaigns and sacrifice, like there's just a handful of buildings around the Nashville area that my wife and I had a chance to be a part of, where it's like we made those sacrificial, donations, and it's like, man, I've got a legacy because we chose to sacrifice. That's right. And I see people get the chance to have church and experience, faith in those buildings. Maybe for someone who's not really thought about the word legacy, like talk about where this building is and the fact that like 40,000 people a day are going to be driving by it. Yeah. Like talk about impact and legacy for a second.
I mean, legacy is the life that outlives you. Yeah. And I think, again, it's biblical. God's the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so for me, I think what we're a part of now is not for us. And it's not even it is for our children. It's really for our children's children.
Yeah.
So I do think of myself in a way as an Abraham. And my boys are the Isaacs. And their kids one day are the Jacobs.
Yeah.
And so I'm having to learn to go, man, what I sow into the ground now may not actually show up in my lifetime, but it will show up in my lifeline.
Good.
And so I'm thinking, like, how do I leave a legacy personally, then as a church?
Yeah.
And what does it look like to leave a legacy and be a part of building something where we go, hey, we're 70, 80 years old, and thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people now walk with Jesus and are making a difference and changing our world. I mean, everybody's living in fear about where our world's going to be. It's like, well, when the world gets darker, the church has got to shine brighter. And so we have an opportunity to think beyond ourselves and think beyond our situation. There's that word again, right? Like to think beyond the moment, the here and the now, to go, man, like how many thousands of people are going to pass a church that don't have hope, that are struggling, and whose children depend on it, whose grandchildren depend on it. And like I've watched it happen. And I think we've got a great example of what it means to live a legacy and right here with us, right? So like we're sitting in a building where someone determined and decided, a group of people really started with Pastor Steve and his wife, but then it leaked out into their congregation of going, was this thing about us the whole time? Or was it about going, you know what? Is it time for us to pass this to the next generation and get to be a part of a move of God?
Yeah.
And I think it's such an example because we have so many people that we know start well.
Yeah.
But to see people finish well, that's just the life I want to live. And I think there's something in every single person that wants to know that what they did here on earth matters.
Yeah.
And at the end of their time, in fact, just to kind of go biblical for a second, like you're going to get judged on what you did here on earth. 2 judgments happen, right? Yeah. The first one is like the great white throne judgment of like, hey, am I in heaven?
Right.
And then it's going to be the next, it's like, what'd you do with Jesus? The next question you're going to get from God is going, and what did you do with what I gave you?
Yeah.
So you go in the stewardship. What did you do with the gifts and the blessings I gave you? Like, did you squander them? Did you use them to be a blessing? So for me, it's like, I just want to go, God, however you blessed me, thank you. Now, how do I use it to bless other people? How do I bless my children? And how do I bless their children? Right. And so, and again, biblical principle.
Yeah.
Blesses the man who leaves an inheritance for his children's children. Again, God thinks in 3. So I think for me, man, like the idea of thinking that way, it shifts what you do. It shifts what you do on the weekends. It shifts what you do with your time. It shifts what you do with your body.
Yeah.
Definitely shifts what you do with your money. It's like, I want this, but if I do that, then that means that. You know what I mean? So you just think differently. And I think as a church, that's what we're thinking about. It's like, hey, what we do is not for us. It's for them.
Yeah.
Like we're building a house, a church for the next generation and the generation to come. So if you don't like where our world is right now, then let's make sure we're a part of creating a better one then.
That's great.
You know what I'm saying? So it's like, let's invest now. Let's sow generously now and get to be a part of reaping a harvest later.
Yeah.
And then watching the impact it makes in the meantime.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. So hope that's helpful. You got anything else?
Man, can't wait to continue the conversation.
I know. It's going to be really good. Dude, I appreciate you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate all the work you've done and working alongside all of the stuff you mentioned because I have no idea.
And I'll have to know.
We would, yeah, it's great, exactly. But we wouldn't be where we are really without your leadership, and I know that that's just going to increase. And so, yeah, I would just tell you, if you've already given to this initiative, thank you, and whatever commitment you made, I would just encourage you to stay faithful to that commitment. And if you're new to this whole thing and you're going, man, how does this process look? Again, you feel free to go on our website, renovation.church/beyond. A lot of sermons on there, an update video. There's some pictures of the land, the property, the location. I think we even talk maybe the estimated cost in there a little bit of going, it could cost this much. And then if you'd like to give, there's a commitment card where if you want to give a specific amount, you can do that and set it up however you'd like.
Yeah.
If you want to give a one-time gift, man, awesome. If you want to make it recurring, great. It's not so much the amount; it's about your heart and just getting to get in on what God's doing. So thank you in advance. And we'll be having some meetings like over the next couple of months where we kind of have some in-person opportunity for people to ask questions and that kind of thing. So be on the lookout for those. We'll give those as we give updates. And yeah, hope you enjoyed this episode, a Beyond Initiative update. And I hope you have a great summer. Again, we're going to be working on some things this summer and won't be having the weekly podcast, but would love for you to join us on Sunday mornings at the high school. You can find our service times online on our website. You can find them on Instagram, on Facebook. So we love you. Hope you have a great week.